Let's go ahead and set up a VR sword. This video is continuing from the pistol video, but you don't need to watch that video if you're only interested in setting up the sword. So there may be a little bit of duplicate information, but it won't be that bad. So to set up the sword, we first need to go through the standard item setup through the item manager. And we need to set up a left and a right-handed sword, because you can hold it in both the right or the left-hand sword. Actually, I normally set up right hand first, so let's go ahead and call this right sword. I can't talk and type at the same time. Alright, so now the item type is sword. It will be added to this first-person character. The sword has an item ID, has an item ID of 22. We aren't going to be holding it at the start, so let's deselect that. First-person base, right hand is correct. The visible item is sword. It's the FBX, so let's make sure we select that. The item parent is on the right hand, so that looks good, and we do not need an animator controller because the sword doesn't animate at all. The action type is melee weapon, and it doesn't consume anything. So now we can hit build, and let's go ahead and do the same thing for the left hand. We're doing this just because you can hold the sword in the left or the right hand, or both at the same time. So they each need to have their own instance. Let's go ahead and set up the left hand, and we're going to use the left hand items instead of the right hand items, and we should be set. Now that we've set up just the standard sword, let's get it set up for VR by opening up the item manager for the VR manager, I guess the items tab of the VR manager, and we'll drag each sword in. So there is one sword, and now let's drag the left sword in and have it set up. So if we're looking at this, what the setup is doing, it's changing some properties that are not necessary, such as this equip event, since you can't, or there's no actual animation event when you're picking up the sword. There's no animation that plays since you're physically picking it up. But in the case of the sword, it also added this new component called VR melee weapon. And what this component does is it allows you to specify how fast you need to be swinging your hand in order for the sword to cause a collision. This will basically prevent you from just casually moving your arm and then it breaking a crate, for example. So if you set it too high, I guess it won't cause any collisions. Too low, and there will be too many collisions. So let's go ahead and hit play, because I've set up the basic of the object, so I should be able to pick it up. If I teleport to the sword, you can see that it's right in front of me, and now I pick it up. The positioning is wrong, texture is wrong. Let me actually try to go to that crate. Get reoriented. Alright, so now I'm at that crate, and we can see I'm trying to slash the crate, but it's not slashing, or it's not being destroyed at all. So we have some things to fix. First thing that I want to fix, let's just make the sword look good. So let's first, when we let go of the hold, or if we stop holding the sword, we want the sword to drop instead of just disappear. So I'm going to specify the sword pickup prefab. And let's scroll down a bit, and under the position, we need to reposition the sword so that it has these values. There's nothing unique about these values that I'm using. It's just what I found to be good values for how the sword is positioned. I got these values by starting it at runtime and then kind of just playing with it until everything was matched correctly. Especially for VR, this helps if you have a second person, so that you don't have to be looking at the headset and then trying to use the Unity inspector at the same time as you adjust the values. So these are some good values that I found. Let me just make sure that looks good. And it does. So the other thing that I want to do is go to the actual sword, the rendered sword object, and I want to change the material so that it's not just a white blob. And now we have an actual sword. So we solved pretty much all the issues except for one, and that one is that when the sword is equipped, the usability doesn't start. The reason it doesn't start is because unlike when you are using, for example, a pistol, you have to pull a trigger with the pistol. Well, with the sword, you always want it to be able to attack, since you're not like actually hitting a button in order for it to attack. So we could do that by just changing the start type to automatic and the stop type to manual, and this will just have this ability always run. But this doesn't work for if you have other item types such as the pistol, where you want it to not always do this. So let's change this back so that we have the normal values, or the starting values. And now we need to use the state system so that when the sword is equipped, it will automatically start this use ability. We can do that by first going to this slot equip ability and noticing this item type state names array. This exists because if we are scrolling through our component list, we'll notice that there is no item set manager like there is with a standard character. With VR, for two-handed VR, there just is no item set manager at all, and it's instead just managed by what you're actually picking up. So we need to add a state so that when the sword is equipped, it will trigger a state name to be enabled, and that state name can then change the usability so that it will start automatically. So we want when the sword item type is picked up, we want this sword state to be enabled. Now there's a difference between if you have the sword in the left hand versus the right hand, so we are also going to enable append slot index, and this will allow the slot index to be appended at the end of the state name. So for example, this would be sword slot 1, sword slot 0. So let's go to this usability, and now let's add the sword slot 0 state, because we're in the slot 0 usability. Slot 0, let's see, slot 0, I think where it goes to the left hand. Or actually, slot 1 goes to the left hand, slot 0 goes to the right hand. All right, so now we'll name this sword slot 0. And then we'll add that same preset and call it sword slot 1. So now when I'm holding it, the usability will automatically start. Let's take a look real quick at this preset. We'll see that, yeah, it just changes the start type and the stop type to what I had changed it before. So let's go ahead and hit play, and now in theory, when I slash the crate should destruct, assuming I slash it hard enough. So its first step is to pick up the sword, and that's proving harder than it looks. So there we go. Now let me get near the crate, and it's going to be kind of tricky the way I'm oriented, but let's see if this works. Perfect. So you could see it in the scene view. You couldn't really see it in the game view, but I slashed the crate. And the reason why that worked was because, let me go to this first person character and scroll down to the usability, and we'll see that this usability is active in slot 1, which is the left hand. The hold ability is also active because I'm holding the sword right now. So now when I drop the sword, we should see the item actually drop, and that's how you do the basic setup for a melee weapon.